Welcome to the Enrichment Today podcast, hosted by Dr. Amy Blansett and the Drew Lewis Foundation. This podcast covers topics to improve stability and find tranquility in your life. Join us as we discuss topics to improve your financial health, change your limiting beliefs, increase your wellness, and so much more. If you like Enrichment Today, make sure to follow the Drew Lewis Foundation and Enrichment Today on social media. Now sit back, relax, and learn to break some crayons with us.
Welcome back to Enrichment Today. Happy to have you join this podcast. Today I have a special guest who I'm going to have introduce himself in just a moment. I'm going to have you introduce yourself.
Okay.
And then the next part is, how do you want me to address you today in the podcast? And how do you ask people to address you on the street? And if you're listening, you don't know why I'm saying this yet, but I have our Chief of Police. I have, I don't even know what to tell you. I have our Chief of Police with us today. And all of a sudden I feel like, shoot, I know you by Paul. I know you as Chief. We just talked about what is your title. So you kind of probably have two roles in two different ways that people might call you, or some people, there might be three ways that the third way we can't mention.
Trust me, I've been called a lot of things. I've been doing this for a long time.
That's what I assume.
But I am the police chief of the city of Springfield,
okay. Paul
Williams. As far as what I meant, my title is chief of police. And so the general fallback for everybody is just chief. And I get that from friends. I get that from coworkers. I get that from peers. I get that from, it doesn't matter. That's the easy one to remember.
All right.
People don't remember
Chief,
your name.
that's easy enough.
All right, but man, I answer to Paul or Mr. Williams or hey you. So, all right.
Exactly.
And also, as well as some of those, usually through social media or emails that we can't talk about.
Yeah,
that people
right.
try to call me. But
yeah.
No, it's pretty easily rolls off the tongue, Chief. So,
Chief. That is an easy one. I was hoping that's what you'd say, because that's the easiest thing. Since I already messed it up in the podcast, I figure we'll go with Chief. All right. So can you provide us a little bit of background on your experience in law enforcement? How did you get here?
Sure. So, well, first let me start from now to move back. I've been here 13 years now as chief of police, and kind of a career cap, if you will. Not really a goal when I started in this, but absolutely pleased to be here. It's been a great experience. Not planning on going anywhere anytime soon. People start asking me that.
Right.
Once you hit a decade someplace, then it kind of moves from how long you've been here to how long are you going to be here. Yeah. So absolutely enjoy it. Still think making a difference and doing what I love doing. So how I got here though. So I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. My dad was a policeman. My grandpa was a policeman. I was going to be a policeman from the time I was 5. I was going to be a policeman in Detroit. That was my goal, my plan, to continue that family tradition, if you will. Went to school at Northern Michigan University, late 70s, early 80s. And for those listeners who may not have been around back then, something called the oil industry went really down in the late 70s, early 80s. And so Detroit, built on automotives and oil, really affected. They laid off 1,500 police officers out of 5,000 in my senior year of college. So not a chance of going there.
Wow.
So following my dad's advice, he said, go south and west. Nothing further than that. He goes, go somewhere else. So
just throw a dart?
Kinda. A couple buddies and I, senior year spring break road trip, ended up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Had a bunch of other places we were going to go, but ended up there. Tested for there, was hired by the police department in Tulsa, and graduated college 2 months later and moved all my earthly possessions into a new car and drove 1,000 miles cross country, someplace I'd been once before, the day I tested, and started a career in law enforcement.
Wow.
So,
big change.
Huge change.
Very big change.
No family, no connections. Just that was a place that piqued my interest. They required college education at the time, which back in 1981 was almost unheard of in law enforcement.
Is that common now?
It was, and then it's kind of ebbed away again. There's a lot of more agencies that do require it, but most still don't.
I imagine
especially smaller.
Recruiting has been a little bit more difficult recently. Is that correct?
It's more difficult. Has been over the last couple of years. That requirement is one of the things we can talk about that here in a minute about how we've kind of changed that. But I've spent 30 years there as a police officer. Did pretty much everything in the police department. Progressed through the ranks, and then getting towards, am I going to retire? Going to do something else? And about that time, I was saying, I want to be the guy. I want to be the person in charge and mold an agency and affect the community in a lot of different ways than someone a couple rungs down. So started looking for an opportunity to be the chief of police somewhere, and Springfield came about. Top of my list, if you will, top of my wife's list. She's from Northeast Oklahoma, family and friends in this whole area, the Ozarks. So it was a good fit to still be close to family, and come to a place that was, I said I've moved 3 times in my life, and I've gotten smaller and safer every time.
Yeah.
Okay, Detroit, Tulsa, Springfield. So got here 13 years ago, saw a lot of what I saw in Tulsa when I first moved there. I said my goal was to be the chief and keep Springfield from becoming Tulsa today.
Gotcha.
Less violent crime, less just danger and violence and situation. Anyway, so moved here. I also wanted a place where I could keep raising my kids and my family. Let my wife retire. She worked in credit union industry for almost 30 years, so she was able to come and retire and keep raising our kids, and then moved here and became the chief. So just starting my 43rd year in law enforcement.
Wow.
13 as the chief, so got a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, and I'm happy to share it here. Been a wonderful community. It's everything we wanted it to be, expected it to be, both on the personal side and the professional side.
Awesome. Glad to hear that. Really glad to hear that. So what is the day in the life of the chief? What are your primary responsibilities when you talk about going through the ranks and, seeing it in different places? And you mentioned now being the individual who gets to create the culture of the force. Mm-hmm. So what are the responsibilities you work with each day?
So there's a lot there, but I kind of distill it down to 2 things. One is internal. So taking care of the men and women that work in the police department, making sure they have the resources and the training and the ability to do what they need to do, while keeping my pulse on the department. And you mentioned culture, making everything is aligned the way it should be, correcting misbehaviors and misactions and bringing people back in line, and just providing a good working environment. And then the second thing is externally, connecting with the community, being involved in the community, being engaged with the community, so that there is a feeling from the top down that we are part of the community. Absolutely hate the phrase "us versus them." That's
right.
not what policing should be.
Absolutely.
Ever should be. It's a we thing. I'll go back to 1829. Sir Robert Peel led the Metropolitan Police. My favorite phrase from his principles was, "The public are the police, and the police are the public, and all power and authority for the police comes from the public." So I echo that with the community. I echo that with my officers. Say we're all in this together. So making sure I have a pulse on the community, and being able to bring needs, wants, desires, how we can funnel into what we do, and then internally taking that back out and responding to those and doing it the best way possible to keep people safe.
That's a great philosophy. I really like. Yeah, it's something that I don't know. When I was a kid, or someone had said to me, and it shaped my idea of I guess what I expect out of the police. And they had said it was something about police are peacekeepers, and I'm sure it was a much more eloquent version of that. But just that idea of, we want peace in our communities, we want peace in our home, and sometimes, unfortunately, we have to have someone from the outside, to come and help provide that. And so we're going to get into some of that today. Is how can we, as a community, not us versus them, right, but collectively, how can we work to create peace and harmony and a community that thrives? So we'll kind of expand on that. Okay, so something that I want to cover that's maybe today will be a little bit more statistics than the rest of what we talk about is there was a recent release of reports about crime in Springfield. Year after year, we do heat maps, we look at numbers, we look at reports. Can you share what are some of the trends, the changes that we're seeing, both good and bad, in what's happening in Springfield crime?
So I'll start with the immediate present. It's encouraging. It's good. My last report to City Council, detailing the first 5 months of the year, shows a decrease across the board in every crime category, which is on the heels of last year showing decreases across the board in 22 compared to 21. Now that's on the heels of about a 3-year trend of increasing crime. Lots of factors. I always tell people the numbers are good as a starting point. You can't just use the numbers and go, things are great or things are bad. One of my mentors a long time ago said, "Man, the first thing you remember as a chief is don't tie your performance of your officers in your department just on the crime numbers, because there are so many underlying factors.
Correct. So many factors.
It's actually a starting point, though, and that's one gauge that the public has, to look at and go, okay, if crime is up or crime is down, is that indicative of how the police are doing things? So the encouraging thing, it's down. And I mentioned the 3-year increase. Now that coincided with COVID.
Right.
And what people don't understand is the huge impact that had on crime and crime prevention. We are a community policing, community engaged law enforcement agency. Well, when you can't interact with the community, when neighborhoods aren't meeting, there's no community events, nobody's calling, nobody's meeting with us, we're not able to go out and interact with people, then we're left to our own devices, if you will, to try to prevent things and solve things on our own. And 350 police officers can't do that by themselves.
Right.
We need all 170,000 people to be with us on that. And when they're cloistered, when they're sequestered, when they're not out in the public, and they're not talking to anybody, it made our job much more difficult.
Yeah.
And it created a kind of a breeding ground for criminal activity, because those folks weren't concerned about being.
Right.
In fact, in some ways it was better, because there weren't so many eyes and ears on the street. Now, there were some things that maybe decreased people being home. Maybe we had less burglaries, less people breaking into houses, because burglars are cowards. They don't want to be around people. They want a vacant structure, unoccupied structure. But personal interaction and just general theft actually increased.
Sure.
I think because
when stress greatly increased for everyone. There was stress and stress often can relate to increase, especially in domestic or those sorts, to where stress is high. I don't have an outlet. Exercise was taking away, even quality nutrition, that socialization that I need. And so I think across the country we saw
personal conflicts increased dramatically. So you mentioned domestic violence increased, child abuse increased, personal confrontation and conflict and fights and disturbances and injuries resulting from that. And then I'll add to that the prevalence of guns in our community. And I can go back to 2016 when the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, did away with what I call the gold standard of concealed carry permitting across the country, which required background check and training and a license, and restricted people who didn't need to have them, but also people that maybe thought it was cool, didn't want to go to that extreme.
Right.
So by just kind of putting carte blanche and let anybody carry one, it created a couple things. And one was, people who maybe thought about it are not going to get a gun, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm a Second Amendment guy.
And you're at any age, you can buy a weapon. We've gone maybe too far with it of protecting. Like, I want to feel protected that someone doesn't just have access to go get a gun.
But the problem was people that then wanted to carry one because it was the concealed carry. We've always had open carry, anybody can carry, but concealed carry, and people think it's neat, and they think and there are some who are trained, and it's a great thing. We have people that want to do it, but a lot of people, it's uncomfortable to carry a gun around all the time. Mm-hmm. People don't realize that. And there's places you still can't take it.
Correct.
And so what we found was two things. One, people would not want to carry them all the time, so they'd stick it in their glove box or in the front seat or in the console, or leave it in their truck or their car, which can then get stolen, which then is used in crime, which then exacerbates the problem.
Children are finding them, and we're seeing, at a small amounts, still, they're in the hands of someone it wasn't intentionally meant for.
Someone who really is a responsible person, but as a gunner, they're irresponsible. So trying to increase that responsibility, keep it secured where no one can get into it. But then the number one thing we found was people who normally would have solved a dispute, a fight, an argument with words, fists. They're losing the argument, so they go, oh, wait a minute, I've got my gun. Yeah. And so we saw a huge spike in the amount of gun violence and the shootings and the shots fired calls that continued through those 3 years. So that's one thing that hasn't abated as much as I would like. It's still, we've crested, we've seen a little bit of a decrease, but the rest of crime, I think, indicative of two things. One, engagement with the public, and the public realizing, okay, we have to be involved with the police. And then two, we put together at the urging of council and our citizens after that 3-year spike about, what are you doing? You got to come up with a plan. So we worked to come up with a very definitive, very aggressive, very structured policing Springfield plan with some defined perimeter and some it's kind of like some initiatives on what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, how to track that. And it really engaged not just the community, but engaged my officers who in a couple years of not really floundering, but just responding to calls.
Right.
And not really having the opportunity to engage with people. I mean, even traffic stops were down because, you don't want to interact with someone and catch something that might kill you. Let's just reduce the interaction. So moving for all that, I think we're seeing the results of both the police officers' efforts and the community's efforts coming together to have a very positive result on reported crime in the city.
So that's actually leading into kind of the next area that I want to discuss about building and maintaining those positive relationships with the police and with the community. And one of the things that we had done last fall within our Harvest Home, kind of this annual event we're doing, is we had the fire truck and the kids could climb through the fire truck. We had the police and the cold patrol. And then just to make it fun, we also had the Ghostbusters van. And really the idea was for both parents and kids to be able to have, with first responders, this different kind of experience to help rebuild those trusts. So can you share with us things like that cold patrol or other things that you're doing in the community to help build those relationships that you're talking about?
Yeah, my key is to let people realize, that police officers are normal people just like you and me. And people need to see them outside of when something bad happens to them and the police show up, or when the police show up and take dad away because he was beating on mom, or arrest your brother because he's dealing drugs, or whatever those bad things that happen in families, and that's the only time they interact with police officers. So an event like you're talking about is made for what we created, what we call the Cold Patrol, which was, there are no new ideas, I'm convinced, so I actually stole this one from the Boston PD about 10 years ago. They had an ice cream truck that was donated, so they would go around neighborhoods and hand out ice cream, and that's a great idea. So our Springfield Police Foundation, which provides equipment and training and things that we can't provide on a normal budget, they bought us a truck, and we had it striped out, and Highland Dairy donates ice cream, and so we call it the Cold Patrol, and literally officers just show up. We can pop up in a neighborhood. We do events like the Harvest Festival you're talking about, but we just show up in a neighborhood in July and go, all right, we're just going to hand out ice cream for the next 30 minutes or until it's gone. It's been a very, very positive thing. Kids love it. And then if the kids love it, then the parents can bring the parents along, and maybe we can create that positive interaction with both generations and let them see police officers in a very positive, trusting, caring mode. And then I'm a firm believer that personal relationships help breed everything else. So it's easy to talk about somebody or something when you don't know them.
Right? Yeah. We use that just
but when you go, but wait a minute, that's Officer Paul, that's Officer Sarah. It's different than to be disparaging. When you put a face and a name with that uniform.
Yeah, those relationships, and we talked about the idea of building trust, building those relationships, and kind of rebuilding some of the climate that's been around police. Obviously, we don't even have to mention that negative component go into social media and the bits. We're talking about body cams and technology here in a minute. But I just really like that idea of what can the Drew Lewis Foundation do to rebuild trust? And it's on both sides. Like you said, it's how do we have officers humanize and personalize the individuals in our community, and the same, how does the community then personalize and realize that this too is a human who wants a safe community. They want to raise a family here. They want to build those relationships. So one thing I want to touch on is this today's political climate and the idea of the discussion of diversity and inclusion. Those words now are being struck from any legal documentation being used in the state of Missouri because you may lose funding, and we're going to that extreme. And so now we're seeing the shift in language to be individuals of social economic status or representing disparities in population. So whatever words we want to use, we can simply lump it all together and say, it's an inclusive community, right? We want to represent everyone. So I was asked to speak on a panel of new recruits. And it was actually, I was honored to be asked as a representative of the community who both I had my first run-in with the law. My father was jaw clenched, at 2, 3 in the morning, picking me up from the Branson jail. Luckily, he got there before we got there, so I never actually went inside. So I can't ever say I've officially been arrested.
You've been arrested, but not incarcerated.
Correct.
Okay.
I was underage, and we were doing absolutely nothing, driving around. But it was, 10:30, and curfew was 10, and I did not abide by the law. I digress. But anyway, this idea of, that was an experience for me, young, of being harassed. I mean, we were doing nothing, and I'm being harassed, and I could have taken that experience, and it could have been very negative. But luckily, I've had very positive experiences with the police after that. So being asked to be on this panel, I got to share the first time of my run-in with the law, but then more importantly, to talk about the community that we represent here at Drew Lewis Foundation, experiences they've had that have led for them to have a lack of trust. So that's a very long explanation to simply ask, what are ways that you leading and creating a culture in the police force, what are ways that you're training or providing opportunities for a staff to think about the diversity of a community and be trained to deal with all those different cultural components that come into policing, developing community trust? That's a lot. There's a lot packaged into that you have to do every day.
There's a lot. You packed a lot in there. Let me see if I can unpack that a little bit and address segments of
14, 15-year-olds being picked up by the police for doing nothing.
Let's not go there.
Okay.
I'm gonna strike that one from the conversation. I'm gonna go back.
Let's go to the real stuff.
Let me try to follow your thought process.
Sure.
Right? So the political climate, the negative narrative around policing
yes.
that we've experienced as a country over the last 3 years has been detrimental in a lot of ways to lack of respect, lack of recruiting, lack of cooperation, and some very negative things. However, I want to caution people or compliment people here in Springfield that we haven't seen that here. Yeah. That we're part of the overall concept of policing, and we're absolutely impacted when bad things happen across the country. And unfortunately, people want to characterize, generalize, and say, well, that's how it is here. It's not. So I think one thing is, we have very well-trained, professional, well-educated, great folks that work here. Two, we have a hugely supportive community that understands that. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, respects, honors, cooperates, works with the police department. So we have a good baseline here to start with. Now, having said that, the negative imagery and narrative and then trying to refute some of that is difficult, both internally and externally. So some things we've done, and I'll go back when I first got here. I've been here 13 years now, growing up in Detroit and then working in Tulsa and coming here. Even I was somewhat shocked at the lack of diversity based on race and ethnicity within mm-hmm. our community. At the time, we were if I remember right, the second whitest community in the country of over 100,000 people behind Portland, Maine.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not necessarily a good thing to have, but it is what it is.
Sure.
So even that, when I looked at the police department, we were even less diverse, less women, less minorities than our community. So my goal I established was for us to mirror our community. Mm-hmm. And I think now that's been adopted nationwide.
Yes.
President Task Force 21st Century Policing used that as kind of one of their tenets, to be reflective of the community, to understand different cultures, different beliefs, different thoughts, and not be perceived as us versus them. It's really to be we. You have to see people that look like you and act like you, etc. So that's been our long-term goal. It's a slow process to get there, but diversity is not a bad word as far as I'm concerned. We are still trying to diversify our workforce. We've doubled the number of women in 10 years on the police department. We went from 0 black officers, let me say that again, we had 0 to, with our current recruit class, 8. So about 2.5%, community is about 4.5%, 5%. 12.5% female, where we were 6, okay?
You mentioned the word diversity, and we did an entire podcast on diversity and the idea of what the word means. And you have mentioned women, you've mentioned people of color, and that's the thing is when we talk about representing our population, and we say we can't use the word diversity anymore, as a female who is often unrepresented in many different fields, I take a bit of offense to saying, no, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about when we say that I want to see a police force that represents me, right? Me is a female.
So think about it as a female, 52% of the population across the country and in Springfield is female. And when you have less than 10% of the officers you're going to encounter, that's not representative. Now, having said that, our goal is not 52%, because it's just policing is a male-dominated profession. There's lots of reasons for that, but there are fantastic female police officers, and so the national average is about 12%. We signed up for the initiative called 30 by 30, which the goal is to increase the number of female recruits in every recruit class to 30% by the year 2030. Nationwide effort that we're working towards. Our current class, we're about 27%, so working towards that. It's a long-term goal, but from a recruiting standpoint, when I'm looking at trying to bring people into law enforcement, I've always said women are an untapped recruiting pool.
Absolutely.
If you have 52% of the population, and only 12% of your officers, there's a 40% gap there that reaching out and focusing efforts to bring more women in is important.
Sure. And women bring a component to policing that without them, not every woman fits what I'm about to say, and it's people can get up riled about, but women tend to have more empathy. They tend to have more experiences in deeper relationships. They problem solve slightly differently. Sometimes they problem solve exactly the same. But having both genders represented in order to discuss a situation and bring different perspectives, same with people of color, same with all of those coming together in a diverse workforce, is so important in order to providing a service that represents, develops trust, and builds what you're talking about. So I'm
you need
excited
that balance.
to hear that.
I'll agree with you, and people may disagree with me too, but you know what? Men and women are different.
Yeah.
Made different, active. Now, that's a generalization, so not everybody fits that mold. But
if people know me, they're going to say, Amy, you barely fit in what you're saying right now, especially my staff. They're like, you have zero emotion until I don't, and then I have massive crying empathy. But yeah, there is.
But having that balance, and so I'll say being in touch with my feminine side is a good thing, and women being in touch with their masculine side.
Absolutely.
Is a good thing. So, but if you only have one element that you work around every day, you're not going to see that. So balancing that is very important. And then striving to mirror the community so people see what they see. Now, that's not to say that any standards have been lowered. There's no change. There's no restriction. There's no deep. In fact, I did the opposite. When I got here, our physical test used to be, I don't know if you're familiar, it's called the Cooper Fitness Test. So, and it's
I'm an
graded,
exercise physiologist,
well,
so
there
I
you
do
go.
know
So
Cooper
all right.
Fitness.
So you know then that it's the standards change based on gender and age. Well, in policing, the standards don't change when you respond to a call for service.
Correct.
Everyone has to do the same thing. So I did have to argue with my HR department when I got her, but I threw that out, and we created a universal, one-size-fits-all test of things that police officers might have to do.
Absolutely. When you're in the field,
everybody meets the same standard. Everybody has to run the same, lift the same, etc. And our HR folks were really concerned that we would decrease the number of women. We've actually increased the number of women because I think there's an equality thing that drives people to that. And then you don't have to worry about when you're out there that, you only did this many push-ups or ran at this amount of time. So how are you going to perform when I do that? Yeah. And then the second thing,
you need that trust in the partner or the other people that are showing up.
Absolutely.
That you have that capacity to support.
And it really struck me as I used to do the Cooper Fitness Test, and I went, when I turned 40, all of a sudden I was in excellent physical shape. Where the day before when I was 39, I was only in good physical shape. Yeah. And I ran the same, lifted the same, did the same. I said, you really need to throw it out. So just one thing we do to kind of even the playing field, as you will, and then increase our recruiting efforts. And then, so moving towards, I think I'm moving in a direction on your question.
I've already forgotten my question. This is just conversation, so it's going to be...
Cultural competence and cultural acceptance and knowledge, really. So we've always had, for 30 years, we've had cultural diversity training in law enforcement. But we brought something here, working with some local folks. There's a national group now that does fair and impartial policing. It's really talking about how do you treat people fairly and equitably, regardless of who they are, social, economic status, color, religion, creed, sexual orientation, whatever it might be, gender. Doesn't make a difference. So we work to create some training with Pratt and Associates. So Francine and Wes Pratt and Dr. Leslie Anderson at MSU created an implicit bias training program for us and brought it in, and we started with all the current officers and civilian staff, and we put everybody through the training, recognizing that everybody has implicit biases.
Yes.
Every person on the planet. Actually, when we got done, I told Francine, I said, I wish I could take this and deliver it to the community, because now my officers understand what you may have hidden. And the goal is not to act on that and to recognize that and treat people fairly. I said, but there's 100,000 people out there who have those who don't think they have
them, right?
They don't think they have that.
Yes.
But it's been really good. And then we've incorporated it in every recruit training class as well, and then developed these community panels, which you got to serve on. And each of them changes. You know, we have representatives from every aspect of the community to come in and talk to the new recruits about, here's some of my interactions. Might be a neighborhood group, might be somebody from the GLOW Center, NAACP, whatever it might be, to come in and go, here's a little different perspective, especially since we recruit nationally. Not everybody knows what goes on here in Springfield. Give them a chance to interact, share stories, answer questions, and give them a little more better basis of knowledge when they go down the street. And then continue that interaction when they're in the field. We meet with every community group and every aspect of the community that desires to try to foster that. And then the last thing I've created about 10 years ago, it's something I call my Chiefs Community Advisory Group. So 15 to 20 citizens. It's my group. I created it. It's not official. It's not formal. There's no backgrounding and invitation process. It's just, here's groups I wanted to meet around the table with and talk about things and share what we're doing, and then hopefully they share with who they represent. And that group kind of moves. It's faith-based, it's neighborhood-based, it's business-based, and sometimes it's people from what you might consider they have their own agenda, but they come to the table with something that we need to address. So I'll give you a couple examples. I had representatives from the Me Too group here in Springfield for about 3 or 4 years. Dealt with some really good issues and made some positive progress, and then they kind of dropped off because they don't see the issue anymore. Yeah. Now I've got representatives from Moms Demand Action who asked to be a part of it and have discussions about guns. It's been really good for me as a sounding board for groups in the community to hear directly from the police and then actually make some changes and develop some things out of that group. So let's me one more aspect, keep my finger on the pulse of the community and what's going on in the community and how things change, and able to redirect our focus on the police department if we need to in that direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, those are really great examples.
So did I get everything?
You did, I think
sure?
so. Yes.
You can come back.
Challenging situations, developing community, you wrapped that all in.
I didn't take notes. I should have noted things while you're going through your question.
Well, thanks for not bringing up how 14, 15-year-olds who start in crime often maintain in crime.
Well, evidently it was an impactful experience because you did not continue in a life of crime.
Yeah, I didn't exist to the world for a month afterwards because my parents shut that down, and I picked rocks and weeds, and I grew up on a farm, so I had my own form of punishment and jail, prison.
So
I would
stop there and
call
say,
that.
I wish there were more parents that did that now, because I will touch on that.
Encourage my parents.
There is not enough parental involvement, parental control over our young people today. Not in a punitive way, but in a corrective behavior modification.
We can totally go into helicopter parenting if
don't need that.
To.
Don't.
Well, but the sense that the helicopter they're watching over them to try to prevent anything, but even when something goes wrong, they're going to try to protect them from ever even having the experience of recognizing that it was wrong and being punished. So let's just keep giving
So, as you said, that quick announcement.
This may be another
helicopter parenting is okay. It's when you rappel down and involve yourself individually in the circumstance instead of just monitoring from above, where it becomes an issue. But there's too many people that the helicopter tends to fly
Correct.
away. And
when it actually comes down to I have to police my children and create a form of punishment that then I have to
be a parent,
own up to, and every day hold myself accountable to what I said. Because sometimes punishing your kids means you too get punished, because now everyone's technically grounded, and that's a part of parenting.
Positive crime report, but one of our growing elements of crime is juvenile crime. And, we had a recent shooting involving some juveniles at, 3 a.m.
Yeah.
There was absolutely no reason for someone, actually there's no reason for anybody to be out at 3
in the morning. There was no reason for me to be out.
But after midnight, a 16, 17-year-old,
no reason at all.
Even 18, 19-year-olds, man, come on. Yeah, there's other places for you to be instead of roaming the streets.
Yeah, absolutely. But, we had a kid break a window one night, again, just out doing nothing. Mm-hmm. There's, no entertainment, bored, and it's later, $300 fixed us. We have cameras. And what was amazing is that we went to, the police showed up, we had video, the police went to the front door, talked to the family, and then we had let the officers know that we would not press charges as long as their son would come and learn about who we are and volunteer with us in the equivalent of what it costs for us to replace the window. Okay. And he did. Okay. And they held him accountable to that. And it was something where, again, we helped create something where sometimes as a parent it's so difficult to figure out, like, just grounding your child doesn't necessarily instill the lesson. Right. And so that way of, okay, now you caused damage. I want you to have an understanding of what that did. So what you did, that's a great example of what people should do. And there's no need to involve the court system, the criminal justice system, to impose that sanction. No. So I guarantee that will make an impact, and you may have diverted. Right. Which I'm all about diverting, keeping people out of the system, correcting behavior, moving on, not just, following to enforcement has to be the thing. But I'm guessing that when you talk to the parents, they were in agreement and they helped support that. Yes.
Okay. That's what we're lacking. Correct. You could have gone over there and you could have got what I've got before is either the parent's not home or they don't care and they say, who are you, or how dare you pick on my kid? Yep. Or, hey, whatever. Right. And don't want to be involved. Yes. So good result for you. And I wish more folks would do that. Absolutely. And develop that type of plan. But it's, again, our thing here is we want to create a sense of community. We want people to have empathy, and you can only gain those empathy and compassion when you've had experiences. Viewing stuff on TikTok and social media just doesn't create the same thing of hands-on and understanding. So
thank you for tuning in to this episode of Enrichment Today. If you would like to hear more of my conversation with the Chief of Police, stay tuned for part 2.